The third generation Corvette was released in 1967 for the 1968 model year. It was produced until 1982, which made it the longest produced generation of Corvette. It featured brand new radical styling, which made it look better than ever. It also featured a T-top, two removable panels on the roof with a support beam in the middle. It is like a target top, but it is more structurally sound. It was the first of its kind on an American car. It also featured pop-out rear glass in the earlier models, with a little pocket for the glass to fit in. It also included vinyl bags for the removable roof panels. The C3 Corvette also changed the headlight operating system, opting for vacuum operated instead of the predecessor's electronically operated concealed headlights. The C3 Corvette also featured concealed windshield wipers, which were very mechanically complicated. The C3 Corvette also has, in my opinion, the coolest door handles out of any car, with them being flush against the body. The C3 Corvette also featured quite a few functional vents, like on the fenders and whatnot. The interior was also completely redesigned, with a large tachometer and speedometer in front of the driver, and 5 auxiliary gauges mounted on the central dash area. The battery was also mounted behind the driver to improve weight distribution. The engine was also pushed far back, so much so that it was considered to be front mid-engined. And the suspension was also all-round independent suspension, as well as four-wheel disc brakes. The C3 Corvette had tons of engine options, 21 to be exact. Before I explain the engines, I need to explain just how they measured their power. Before 1971, they measured using gross power, which was just the engine. No alternators, no air conditioning, no water pump, no air filters, just the bottom and top end, and carburetors. Everything the engine needed to run, but you wouldn't actually have that much power. In 1971 and onward, the power was measured using net power, which was the engine equipped with all accessories. This led to lower but more accurate power figures. Straight out the gate, in 1968 there were 6 engine types offered. The base model was a 300 horsepower 327 cubic inch engine, which made a very strong 360 pound-feet of torque. It had a very high compression ratio of 10:1. There was a more powerful 327, which was the L79 engine, which had forged internals, a hotter cam, and other upgrades. This engine made 350 horsepower, as well as an even higher compression ratio of 11:1. The other 4 engines were all big block engines, all being 427 cubic inches. The lowest end of the bunch was the L36 engine with 390 horsepower, a very hardy 460 pound-feet of torque, as well as the compression ratio of 10.25:1. The L68 engine used the same internals as the L36. The only difference is that instead of using a standard 4-barrel that all preceding engines used, this one uses triple 2-barrel carburetors. This increased power by 10 horsepower, bringing it up to 400. The L71 was the most powerful engine offered, making a huge 435 horsepower. The torque didn't increase compared to the other 427 engines, and it had a compression ratio of 11:1. There was one engine that was incredibly exclusive, the L88 Big Block, only made 80 in 1968. It claimed to only make 430 horsepower, which was less than the L71, but in reality, it made over 500 horsepower. This was a race-ready engine. It also made 485 pound-feet of torque and had a huge compression ratio of 12.5:1. A handful of them went to the 1968 24 Hours of Le Mans. However, all had issues, but they were fast. One of them accordingly went 170 going down the Mulsanne Straight. The 1969 engine options were also really big, at 7 options. To start, the L36, L68, L88, and L71 engines were unchanged. The 2 small block engines increased in size from 327 cubic inches to 350, keeping the 300 and 350 horsepower, but both increasing to 368 pound-feet of torque, 20 more than the previous year's 360. The base model also had a slight increase in compression, 10:1 to up to 10.25:1. There was also an even rarer engine, the ZL1. It had around the same specs as the L88 race engine, which was still underrated. But instead of using a cast iron block like the L88, the ZL1 used an aluminum block, saving around 100 pounds, and there were only two ZL1 Corvettes made in 1969. The 1970 engine options had five, two old, three new. The old ones were the base model 350 and the L46 engine. There was also a new small block available that year, the LT1, which was still a 350, but it had 370 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque. It also had an 11-to-1 compression ratio. All 427 engines were dropped, but now they use an even larger and beefier 454 engines. The lower end of the two is the LS5 engine, producing 390 horsepower and a mind-boggling 500 pound-feet of torque, as well as 10.25 to 1 compression. There was one more engine that sadly never saw the light of day. It was the LS7 V8, making a huge 460 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, as well as 11.25 to 1 compression ratio. The engine was advertised in the 1970 Corvette sales brochures, but it never made production due to emission regulations just starting to pop up. The engine name shares with the newer LS7. The 1971 engine options had four engines, all being changed from the previous year. This was also the first year of using net horsepower rather than gross horsepower. This means that the power figures will be lower, but also more accurate to real-life driving. All engines also had a significantly lower compression ratio. This is due to the phasing out of leaded fuels. Leaded fuel has a higher octane rating than unleaded fuels, but it also has lead in it, which isn't good. The base 350 was lowered to 270 horsepower gross or 210 net, with torque being 360 gross or 300 net. The compression was relatively low at only 8.5 to 1. The LT1 engine had a much lower 275 horsepower, which was almost 100 less than the previous year. It had 300 pound-feet of torque as well as 9 to 1 compression ratio. The big block 454 engines also sadly got detuned as well. The LS5 went from 390 horsepower to 285. The torque also dropped from 500 to 390 pound-feet of torque. It also had an 8.5 to 1 compression ratio. The most powerful LS6 engine had 325 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque and a 9 to 1 compression ratio. This engine was very rare, with only 188 examples being made. Overall, the 1971 engines were the beginning of slow and sluggish performance. The 1972 engines got even more consolidated, now at just three choices. The base 350 lost 10 horsepower, leaving it at 200 horsepower, but kept everything else. The LT1 lost 20 horsepower, now sitting at 255 horsepower. It also dropped by 20 pound-feet of torque, going down to 280 pound-feet. The LS5 was also affected, dropping by 15 horsepower, now sitting at 270 horsepower. The 1973 engines managed to achieve something that hasn't been done in 18 years, an engine that made less than 200 horsepower in the Corvette. The base model 350 was made even more lethargic, dropping another 10 horsepower, bringing that down to 190, and 30 pound-feet of torque, bringing that to 270 pound-feet of torque. Keep in mind, the Corvette was a sports car. The LT1 and LS5 engines were also replaced. The LT1 with the L82 making 250 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque. This was a decrease in horsepower from the previous year, losing only 5 horsepower, but it also gained 5 pound-feet of torque. The compression ratio stayed the same at 9 to 1. The LS5 engine was replaced with the LS4 engine, which probably confused some people with the naming. The torque was also increased, to 390 to 395. It was a small increase, but one nonetheless. The compression ratio decreased surprisingly, from 8.5 to 1 down to 8.25 to 1. The 1974 model year marked the last year that a big block was ever available on a Corvette. It is also my favorite model year. The base engine was a bit more powerful, going from 190 to 195 horsepower. Torque went from 270 to 275. The L82 engine remained the same, and the LS4 didn't go out with a bang. Sadly, it was in its most vulnerable form. getting lowered to 270 horsepower, and even worse, 380 pound-feet of torque. This is still from a 454 7.4 liter. The 1975 model year is, in my opinion, the most malaise year of the Corvette. It got catalytic converters and lost its true dual exhaust, now just splitting into two at the end of the pipe. There were only two engines this year. The base model was the most lethargic out of any year, making a horrid 165 horsepower from a 350 V8. Torque was also hurt, dropping to 255 pound-feet of torque. The L82 engine was not much better, losing almost 50 horsepower. It remained at 205 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque. The oil crisis finally caught up with the Corvette. The 1976 engines got more powerful, but were still considered to be very lethargic. The base model increased by 15 horsepower, bringing it up to 180. Torque also had gains, from 255 to 270. The L82 was slightly improved, gaining 5 horsepower, bringing it up to 210. Torque had stayed the same on the L82 though. Literally nothing changed in 1977. The 1978 model year had small gains again though. The base model was brought up by 5 horsepower, landing on 185 horsepower. Torque was also brought up to 280. Compression was lowered, going down from 8.5 to 8.2 to 1 compression. L82 was also increased from 210 to 220 horsepower. Torque was brought up from 255 to 260 pound-feet. Compression was also lowered on that engine from 9 to 1 to 8.9 to 1. 1979 brought small gains again, the base model going up from 185 to 195 horsepower. Torque stayed the same, and the L82 was brought up to 255 horsepower and 270 pound-feet of torque. The 1980 model year brought a new, rather odd engine into the lineup. It was available for 1 year, and it was the LG4 engine, which was a 305 cubic inch V8. It was the smallest engine available for the entire C3's history. It was also a California exclusive. It made 180 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque. It was one of the lowest of the entire C3's history. It also had a 8.6 to 1 compression ratio. The base 350 also lost 5 horsepower, bringing it to 190. Torque stayed the same. On the L82, it actually gained 5 horsepower, bringing it up to 230 horsepower, with a 5 foot-pound increase that also happened, taking it to 275 pound-feet of torque. Compression ratio returned to 9.1. The 1981 model year had only one engine option, the new, in quotes, L81 engine. It was exactly the same as last year's base model 350. 1982 was the final year of the C3, and it had one of the most controversial engines, the L83 Crossfire 350 V8. It had 200 horsepower, 285 pound-feet of torque, and a 9 to 1 compression ratio. The main feature of this engine is it used crossfire injection, which used throttle bodies, and it was found to be very complex and overpowered for what it was. You also could not equip a manual with this year, instead offering a brand new 4-speed automatic with overdrive, which was found to be also very problematic. The engine of the Corvette really shows how those nearly 2 decades played out. It started with high power, high compression engines that drank leaded fuel, the most powerful of them exceeding 500 horsepower, which then it got slightly worse with them moving over to unleaded fuel, bringing down the horsepower, but it was still a really good sports car. But once emission laws came around, the Corvette was really not a spirited performer, with the lowest horsepower being 165 horsepower. The Corvette received many styling changes over the years as well, some minor, others major. I'm going to explain all the Corvette changes that were noticeable. And I'll talk about my favorite year Corvette, because this is my video and not yours. The 1969 Corvette had the engine enlarged, 327 to 350. This also brought an increase in torque, and it also had Stingray nameplates placed on the fenders. The steering wheel was also made vinyl, and it was also made slightly smaller. The wheels were made to be 8 inches wide compared to the 7 inches last year. It was also the only year where you can get optional side pipes. The 1970 Corvette had the big blocks made bigger, from 427 to 454. The LT1 engine was also added. The idiotic 3-speed was also axed from the lineup, making the 4-speed manual standard. Chevrolet's positive traction limited slip differential was also made standard, an amazing addition for a sports car, something that even the modern Nissan Z doesn't come standard with. The fender and grills were also redesigned. They became known as egg crate styling. The interior also got new seats and some redesigned panels. It also could come with wood grain and some leather bits. The 1971 Corvette was designed to run unleaded fuel, reducing power all around. It was also began measured net horsepower instead of gross. The 1972 Corvette was the last year for an LT1 engine. The chrome bumper, removable rear window, and the windshield wiper door was also the last year that this could come with. The 1973 Corvette removed the chrome front bumper, bringing a new front bumper that was made of urethane. It was a 5-mile-per-hour bumper, but one of the best looking ones compared to other manufacturers. The front fender vents were also redesigned. Radial tires also became standard. There was also rubber body mounts and a new hood with rear induction, as well as a new emblem. The 1974 Corvette is my favorite year for the Corvette. It is the last year for the big block engines, last year for the true dual exhaust, and the last year without catalytic converters. It was also finally stripped of chrome, opting to use a urethane rear bumper, just like the front one. The previous year looked really awkward, only having one chrome bumper which was in the rear. It also had a year-exclusive split rear bumper. My grandpa actually has a 1974 Corvette, and it looks and drives amazingly. I love it very much, and it might be the reason for being my favorite year, but not fully. The 1975 was the worst year for Corvettes. It absolutely killed the power, crippling it to a 165 horsepower standard engine. It also had catalytic converters, a redesigned one-piece rear bumper, new emblems, and was also the very last year for a C3 convertible. The 1976 model replaced the floor panels, making them out of steel. You could also get aluminum alloy wheels as an option. There was new lettering, and it removed the rear air induction that was added in 1973 on the hood. The 1977 model let us get the C3 in black, as well as new nose and fender emblems. There was also a redesigned interior with new gauges and center console, as well as a standard GM radio. The 1978 model year brought a handful of new and cool additions, like glass T-tops, a silver anniversary edition, and an Indy 500 pace car edition with redesigned gauges and interior. The 1979 model year added the sport seats, glass T-tops, and other options from the previous year as options. The interior got a slight comfort increase again. The 1980 model year is one of my least favorite in terms of looks. The front end was redesigned, and it makes it look really bloated. Combine that with the really lethargic power of 190 or 180 if you're in California. Federal laws also limited the speedometer to 85. 1981 model year killed the 305 cubic inch V8 that was introduced the year prior in California, bringing back the 350 in California. The 1982 model year was terrible. It brought one of the worst engines available for the C3 Corvette, the 350 Crossfire. It also couldn't be optioned with a manual transmission, making the Corvette pretty much into a personal luxury car at that point. The C3 Corvette styling was beautiful. It was curvy. It looked much ahead of its time, especially when most cars from 1968 were boxy with huge square grills. The Corvette was curvy. It was small and nimble, and when it was introduced, it was powerful. But as the years went by, it gained horsepower until 1971. The real year it lost all power was in 1975, but it still looked immaculate. No other American car looked anything like it with its huge fenders, long hood, flush door handles, and hidden windshield wipers. Astronauts drove this car, and I can see why. It looked just like a spaceship, and it had the interior of one too. All this really makes it the finest American car that was ever made. And with how things are going right now, with all these huge SUVs and crossovers and high and mighty pickup trucks, I do not see that changing anytime soon. This has been Italian Man talking about the C3 Corvette, and I will see you guys next time.